Religion has always claimed to be about truth, eternal truth, divine truth, absolute truth. But when we look closely, it starts to look less like a pursuit of truth and more like a system for control, cohesion, and comfort. Truth, in its simplest sense, is about correspondence with reality. It's about statements that can be tested, verified, and confirmed against the world we live in. If I say water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level, you can test that. It doesn't depend on belief, culture, or tradition, but religion doesn't work that way. It asks people to accept stories not because they can be tested, but because they must be believed. That distinction is crucial because it shows that religion was never really competing in the same arena as science, history, or reason. It wasn't designed to explain the universe in a factual way. Instead, it functioned as a glue, a way to bind people together, give them shared myths, and regulate behavior. That's why every society in history has had some form of religion, even though the details differ wildly. Think about it. If religion was truly about truth, then different cultures should have eventually converged on the same beliefs. Just like people around the world all eventually recognized that the Earth is round, or that the sun is at the center of our solar system. But that never happened. Instead, religions multiplied, split, and contradicted one another endlessly. A Hindu cosmology looks nothing like a Christian one. A Norse afterlife has no resemblance to an Islamic one. Each was tailored to the society that created it, reflecting its struggles, its geography, and its social order. Religion didn't spread because it was true. It spread because it was useful. Useful for kings who wanted obedience, for priests who wanted authority, and for communities that needed rituals to mark time, birth, death, and conflict. Religion explained the unexplainable, not because the explanation was accurate, but because it was functional. When people didn't understand disease, they said it was caused by demons or divine punishment. When crops failed, they said the gods were angry. These weren't truths, they were coping mechanisms. And once an explanation takes root, it often becomes more powerful than the truth, because it doesn't have to prove itself, it only has to be repeated and enforced. Even today, we see this logic. People might know the scientific explanation for thunder, but that doesn't stop some from still attributing disasters to divine will. Because religion is less about facts and more about meaning. It gives people a narrative that tells them who they are, where they came from, and what happens after death. That's why questioning religion feels so threatening. Not because it destroys truth, but because it shakes the story. If religion were truly about truth, it would welcome challenges, evidence, and doubt. But instead, it punishes doubt and labels skepticism as sin. That's the giveaway. The defense mechanisms built into religion, threats of hell, accusations of blasphemy, fear of punishment, these are not tools for protecting truth. They're tools for protecting belief. And once you see that, everything looks different. Suddenly you realize that the grand stories, the sacred texts, the rituals, and the rules aren't grounded in reality at all. They're grounded in human psychology, in fear of the unknown, desire for belonging, and the need for certainty where none exists. Religion becomes easier to understand once you stop asking whether it's true and start asking what it does. What job does it perform in a society? What psychological function does it serve for individuals? Anthropologists have long noticed that religion works like a survival tool. Not survival in the sense of explaining reality accurately, but survival in terms of holding a group together. Shared myths create shared identity. If you believe your tribe was chosen by a god or descended from a divine ancestor, you're more likely to fight for them, sacrifice for them, and trust them. This is why religious stories are so different from scientific explanations. Science cares about whether something can be tested. Religion cares about whether something can bind people to a story. And in that sense, the most useful story is not always the most accurate one. Consider how ancient empires used religion to justify power. Egyptian pharaohs claimed to be gods on earth. Chinese emperors ruled under the mandate of heaven. Medieval kings claimed divine right. Were these claims true? Of course not, but they worked. They gave rulers a sacred authority that ordinary people were too afraid to question. That's the key. Religion isn't really about discovering truth, it's about making truth irrelevant. If people already believe their king rules by divine will, then whether he's wise or just no longer matters. His power becomes untouchable, and this pattern shows up everywhere. In ancient Israel, priests wrote laws they claimed came from God himself. Laws about diet, clothing, purity, sacrifice. But by attributing them to God, these rules stopped being negotiable. No one could argue because to argue meant defying the divine. That's not truth-seeking, that's authority-seeking. Religion also functions as a kind of emotional regulator. Life is unpredictable, often cruel. Without explanations, people are left with anxiety and despair. Religion fills that gap. If your child dies, you're told it was part of God's plan. If your harvest fails, it's because you didn't please the gods enough. The explanations aren't accurate, but they're comforting. They give people a sense of control where none actually exists. Psychologists call this pattern seeking. Humans evolved to look for causes even when none are there. It's better for survival to mistakenly see a predator in the bushes than to miss one. Religion amplifies this instinct, turning random chance into intentional design. A storm isn't weather, it's punishment. A rainbow isn't sunlight through water, it's a promise from God. These beliefs don't reveal truth, but they reduce fear. And that's why religion lingers. It's sticky. It doesn't compete with evidence, it bypasses the need for evidence altogether. The next layer is morality. Religion often claims to be the source of moral truth, but if we look closer, that falls apart too. Morality existed long before organized religion. We see fairness, empathy, and cooperation in other animals. Early humans survived because they shared food, helped each other hunt, and cared for the sick. These behaviors were practical, not divine. Religions came along later and wrapped those instincts in divine authority. Don't steal became not just common sense for community survival, but a command from God. That move gave morality extra weight, but it also locked it into place. It froze morality inside rigid codes that often did more harm than good. Consider slavery. For thousands of years, religions not only tolerated it but endorsed it. Biblical texts regulate how slaves should be treated rather than questioning the practice itself. The same with patriarchy. Women were told to submit, not because it was fair, but because it was said to be divinely ordained. Religion made inequality harder to challenge because it turned human customs into eternal laws. If religion was really about truth, it would have opposed these injustices early on. Instead, it sanctified them. And only much later, under pressure from secular movements, did religious institutions start revising their interpretations. Always after the fact, never ahead of it. What we see here is a pattern. Religion doesn't discover truth. It repurposes human needs into sacred narratives. It provides certainty, belonging, and authority, but never actual knowledge. And this explains why religions resist change so fiercely. If the point was truth, then new evidence should lead to correction. But when Darwin showed that species evolved through natural selection, religion resisted. When astronomy showed Earth was not the center of the universe, religion resisted. When truth starts to catch up, religions don't usually collapse on the spot. They adapt. They bend just enough to stay relevant while holding on to authority. This is one of the clearest signs that religion isn't about truth, because truth doesn't need negotiation. Only institutions that depend on belief need to shift when the ground beneath them changes. Think about astronomy. The early church insisted the sun revolved around Earth. This wasn't just a scientific claim, it was a theological one. Earth had to be the center of creation, because Scripture said so. But when Copernicus and Galileo showed otherwise, religion eventually adjusted. It didn't admit to being wrong about truth. It reframed the story. The same pattern happened with evolution. At first, Darwin's theory was condemned as dangerous and blasphemous. Over time, some churches softened. They began saying evolution was just how God created life, not because they had new evidence, but because ignoring science entirely would make them irrelevant. This is the strategy. Religion survives by absorbing challenges. It shifts language, reinterprets texts, and blends myth with fact just enough to keep people on board. A religion that truly cared about truth would welcome correction. But instead, what we see is resistance first, adaptation second, always protecting authority, never simply admitting error. This adaptation isn't just about science. It's also about morality. As societies evolve, religions tend to update their stances in ways that keep them socially acceptable. Slavery, once defended with scripture, is now universally condemned. Women, once excluded from leadership, now serve as priests and pastors in many denominations. Homosexuality, once branded as sin without question, is now being reinterpreted or quietly ignored in more progressive congregations. But here's the question. If these changes reflect truth, why weren't they there from the beginning? Why did religion trail behind rather than lead? Because the purpose of religion is not to uncover truth, it's to preserve cohesion. As long as the old rules held society together, they were defended as divine. When those same rules threatened to break society apart, religion shifted to stay in the game. We see this clearly in how religions splinter. Christianity has over 40,000 denominations, each one a product of disagreement, reinterpretation, or cultural adjustment. If religion was about truth, there would be one version, consistent, universal, undeniable. Instead, we see a patchwork of stories, each claiming to be the ultimate truth, but none able to settle the disputes. This diversity of belief doesn't prove truth, it proves flexibility. Religion survives not because it's right, but because it's adaptable. Like a shapeshifter, it changes form to fit the needs of each era. Sociologists often describe religion as a cultural technology, not technology in the sense of machines, but technology in the sense of a tool for managing human life. Myths serve like software, running in people's minds, shaping how they think, feel, and act. But tools don't have to be true to be useful. Take money as an analogy. Money is just paper or numbers on a screen. Its value isn't real, it's agreed upon. Yet that shared illusion organizes entire economies. Religion works the same way. The beliefs aren't true, but as long as people agree on them, they function. They coordinate behavior, regulate morality, and justify authority. But unlike money, which openly admits to being a social construct, religion insists its stories are objectively real. That insistence is what makes it powerful, but also misleading. Even today, in the age of science and secular institutions, religion holds influence by claiming timeless truth while constantly reshaping itself. A megachurch pastor might preach about prosperity and personal success rather than sin and damnation. A Buddhist teacher in the West might downplay supernatural beliefs and focus on mindfulness as a kind of psychology. These are modern adaptations, designed not to reveal truth, but to keep religion marketable in a skeptical age. And this brings us to another angle. If religion was really about truth, why does it look so different depending on where and when you're born? A child born in Saudi Arabia is likely to grow up Muslim. A child born in Italy is likely to grow up Catholic. A child born in India may grow up Hindu. The so-called truth is always shaped by geography, culture, and family. That alone tells us it's not about discovering reality. It's about inheriting a story. So the pattern becomes clearer with every example. Religion doesn't survive by being true. It survives by being useful. Useful to rulers, useful to communities, useful to individuals searching for comfort or meaning. The truth of the claims is secondary, sometimes ignored, sometimes resisted, sometimes rebranded, but never the actual point. One of the most important ways to see religion clearly is to look at death. The promise of an afterlife has always been central. Heaven, paradise, reincarnation, they're different in detail, but all serve the same function. They reduce fear and make loss easier to bear. But notice something. None of these promises come from evidence. They come from stories repeated until they feel like truth. If truth was the goal, religions would admit we don't know what happens after death. They'd leave the mystery untouched. Instead, they fill the void with certainty, and certainty is powerful. It gives people confidence, direction, and relief. But it's not truth. It's comfort disguised as knowledge. This is why religions flourish most where life is hardest. In places of poverty, conflict, or instability, belief thrives. It provides order, meaning, and hope when reality offers little. In more secure and educated societies, religion often declines. Not because people suddenly lose their spiritual side, but because the practical need for belief is weaker. Once again, truth doesn't explain the pattern, utility does. When you look across history, the same design repeats. Religion organizes people, motivates obedience, maintains power, soothes fear, and explains the unexplainable. These are functions, and functions don't require truth. They only require belief. The difference matters. Because when something is about truth, it welcomes being tested. It allows doubt, correction, and change driven by evidence. When something is about control and survival, it resists doubt. It punishes those who question. It rewrites itself not to reflect reality, but to preserve authority. Religion has always been in the second category. It was never about truth. It was about survival, about cohesion, about control, and about comfort. That's why it changes when societies change. That's why it fragments when people disagree. That's why it resists evidence until it's forced to adapt. And yet, even when the claims collapse under scrutiny, religion doesn't disappear overnight. Because people don't just want truth, they want meaning. They want connection, ritual, and hope. Religion has been one way of meeting those needs, but it has never been the only way. The challenge now is whether we can build systems of meaning and community that don't depend on myths pretending to be facts, systems that are honest about what we know and don't know, systems that can still provide comfort without demanding belief in things that aren't real. The end of religion as an authority on truth doesn't have to mean the end of everything people valued in it. It could mean the beginning of something more honest, something more humane, something that faces reality directly and still finds ways to make life meaningful. Religion was never about truth, but our lives can be.